I'm going to speak about my brother. He passed away in 1987 and he was 33. It was sudden. So I knew nothing about what he wanted. I was younger, I was 29. I wouldn't have known to ask prior to this because we didn't know that his death was coming. I would have wanted to know what he wanted for his widow, his wife. I'd want to know what he wanted for his children. And I'd also like to have known what, if it hadn't been sudden, what he would have wanted for his end of life. Um, I think they would have been hard questions for him because he had become quite Orthodox, an Orthodox Jew, and he had moved with his Israeli wife to Israel in 1985 with his three children, and while there, had adopted a fourth child. And 2 years there, becoming more and more observant. And I never would have thought to ask him any of that. Um, but now that I'm 64 and he would be 67, and I, I also wonder how he would how he would see his family, which has grown exponentially, all the grandchildren he would have. Um, I guess I would like to have just discussed planning, family planning, and end of life planning, and um, how he would see that, what he'd want his children to do for him, what he'd want his wife to do for him. I'm really at a loss because it's such a big topic. My father also passed away in 2015, and I was much more involved in end of life care, having been a oncologist and also a hospice nurse. Um, that's a little different story because he passed away suddenly as well in a hospital, and I couldn't get to California to see him before he passed. He had actually written an ethical will, and he pretty much had made clear what he wanted for himself when he passed away. But I would have liked to have heard him say it to me. It was written down, but it wasn't said to me. My brother, end of life was not even a discussion, just wasn't a discussion. So I would have liked with him to have started the discussion if I had been in the mind to ask him those questions. I was in the mind to ask my father those questions, but I couldn't get to him. So that death was very hard. Well, I'm pretty clear for myself what I'd want. And I have had these conversations already with my husband. We have completed our wills, and they both talk about no heroic measures, the desire for hospice, if it comes time for that. Um, I do not want to be resuscitated if my quality of life is going to be very poor. So I would want to make sure my mother, who is now 89, going on 90, that she's aware of what I want. And we've actually been talking a lot about what she wants, have many conversations about that. I'd want to make sure that my brothers know. And I think those conversations have already started happening. As we meet every Sunday morning, the entire family meets for the last 2 years since COVID started. We've been meeting by Zoom, and it continues and will probably continue for quite a long time. Those conversations are happening on Zoom as well. What I want for myself is comfort at the end. And sorry about that. Uh, I want, I can't say I want them to be comfortable with my choices, because that's going to be up to them. I want them to know my choices. I do not want cremation. I would love to have what my father had, and I don't think it's going to happen here in Texas, but in California, he was buried in a wicker casket. It was pretty fascinating. And so as he decomposes, his casket decomposes pretty quickly, so he becomes part of the earth very quickly. This is something that I would like for myself. I just don't know if that's going to be possible when I reach that time. I'm assuming that my end of life will come naturally, um, but I have no idea. So I just want to be ready if that were to happen. So my father actually had written um, a document about what he wished for his family and what he wished for his wife upon his passing. He wrote that document in 1980, 1980, and he passed away in 2015. We found the document, my mother found the document under the bed within the year after he passed. And she sent it to us, and it was remarkable. You might have discussed, or you might know about an ethical will. And it was clearly an ethical will, passing on his ethics, his beliefs, his wishes, his morals down to his children and to his wife. And it opened the door for all of us to start talking. My mother started talking about what her ethical will might look like. My brother, a rabbi, a conservative rabbi in Albuquerque, started putting his together for his children. My brother in New Jersey as well. But here was my father talking to us about what he wanted for us, what he wanted us to know about him, and how he wanted us to live our lives. I would just have loved to have found that document or have him handed that document to me or us before he passed away so we could discuss it with him and tell him where he was right on target and maybe tell him where he's a little off. But to have opened that conversation so that we could also start telling him what we wanted. Because I don't think he knew what any of us wanted. Maybe my mom, but certainly not his children. But it was quite a gift to find that document. In fact, I would love to share it with you sometime. My brother's a whole different story. He was just beginning a whole new part of his life. So the end of his life was jarring because he was in the middle of a beginning. And suddenly his family had to deal with his end. My father, being 85, was nearing the end of his life. So I would have liked to have been able to help him as his life was ending, but I couldn't. And there's always that hole, but we are resolving that weekly with family. As we discuss that, we talk about father a lot on those calls, those Zoom calls.